Right, we're going to have a look where we are, start with. We've got our trusted Jet Ranger, we're at City Airport, and we're going to carry on with our flying lessons. And we're going to look at exercise 14 and 15, which is circuits and for a solo. I was thinking about it, what's the point in a solo on a flight simulator flying lesson? Because if you're flying the thing, you've all been flying the thing solo anyway. But I was thinking, if you actually took this into the real world, the kind of things that affect people flying solo might be worth discussing. So in our last little flying lesson, we had a look at takeoff transitions. So we'll briefly go through those, and then we'll look at flying the circuit and the landing transition. We'll do a couple of circuits, and then we'll have a look at some of the malfunctions that might affect us as we're flying circuits. So let's start with our takeoff transition. Let's get the thing into a nice hover. Now normally circuits at airports they're supposed to be rectangular, but more often than not they're limited by the real estate the airports have got, talking and flying, and also the noise issues they might get with irate locals complaining about the noise. So let's take off along our runway. So initially, nose down, bit of power to stop the sink. As the aircraft accelerates, push forward, flat back and translational lift, looking to build our speed to about 40 knots. Then let the nose come up, and ideally, until you get to about 300 feet, you want to be pulling absolute maximum power. I'm not going to do it in the simulator, just because the aircraft climbs like a homesick angel. But that's to get you away from the ground as quickly as possible in the event something goes wrong. And then as you pass 300 feet, you would then actually reduce power to your maximum continuous, whatever power setting you want for the climb. And we're going to climb to about 1,000 feet, 60 knots. And then once we've got 1,000 feet, we'll turn crosswind. Now if you haven't got ground features to use to sort of mark out your circuit, you could just use the compass. We've taken off on 09 at City. So if we make a 90-degree turn to the left, that will put us on our crosswind leg. And we'll aim for about 80 knots, 1,000 feet. So we turn north. There we are heading north, that's our crosswind leg. Before we turn downwind, we want a good look to the right, to make sure there's nobody joining the circuit on the downwind leg. And then we make another 90-degree turn. So now we're flying in the opposite direction to the runway we've just taken off on. Financial centre of London. So on west, downwind, we'll carry on trimming the aircraft, so we want our 80 knots, 1,000 feet. And downwind, you'd also check your aircraft in terms of checking your lights, so you haven't got any warning lights on. Engine and rotor RPM, all your gauges are reading the green. You've got sufficient fuel, and if necessary, you do a radio call to set you downwind. Airports over there. Now what you want, it's very difficult to do in the simulator because I can't turn my head fast enough. What you want to be doing is flying downwind until you're at about a 45-degree angle to the threshold of the runway. See there we're about a 90-degree angle. So we keep going until we're about a 45-degree angle. Forward turn base leg. And depending on how big or how small your base leg is, that determines when you're going to start descending. So another 90-degree left turn. As we're making this turn, we could be looking down the final approach track, which would be where the O2 stadium is there, making sure there's nothing joining on a straight in approach. Oop. So I've gone up a load and I'm talking. That's the Excel Center, for those who don't know. And we'll start our descent just before we turn final. So reducing power, power attitude trim, get ourselves going down, select an attitude for 60 knots. Yep. A little bit high. Now as soon as you turn on to final, you're flying visual references again. So there's two things you're trying to do. You're trying to keep the aircraft moving forward and what appears to be a relative walking pace. As you get closer to the ground, if you maintain the same speed, the ground will appear to be moving faster. So you need to slow down, and the idea being that you progressively slow down until you're about 10 feet off the ground, doing a slow and steady walking pace. Now with our power, we're trying to keep our landing reference point, i.e. the middle of the runway, in the same spot on the windscreen. If I reduce power too much, I don't want to go down anymore. If I just dive a little bit, our reference point will move up the windscreen as we get too low, and if I increase power, our reference point goes down the windscreen as we get too high. So we're just trying to keep our reference point middle of the windscreen until we get down to about 100 feet or so, at which point we want our reference point to start moving down the windscreen, otherwise we'll end up landing short. Increasing the power, bit of left pedal, and just keep the aircraft moving steadily forwards until you've got everything under control. So you've got your trim sorted out, aircraft pointing the way you want it to go, and then you're just going to gently adjust your power as the aircraft comes to a stop. And then we can finish off our circuit with a landing. Remember, a good landing starts from a good hover, so let's try and get one of those first. Says, or in my case a bad hover. And there we go. That's a circuit at City Airport. Any questions? Any questions? Right, let's have another one of those, and then we'll have a look at some of the emergencies that can affect you whilst you're going around the circuit. Nice takeoff. This time we'll do a spot turn. So up to the hover, everything nice and stable in the hover. He says wobbling all over the place. Try and do a spot turn like we did from our last lesson, keeping it over the runway as we go around. Just have a look at what's going on. You wouldn't do this on a big airport because you'd be under control of the controllers anyway, so they'll do all that bit for you. But at a smaller airport, it's a good exercise to do. Funnily enough, all those parked up aircraft, this is what City Airport looks like now. I flew over Heathrow yesterday, and normally you have to go around the back of all the, in the real world this is, you have to go around the back of all the thresholds, but there was nothing landing or taking off, so they just cleared us straight across the airport, which I think is a first. Okay, so let's transition forwards, push forwards, a little bit of power to stop the sink, steady push forward through translational lift and flatback, build the speed up to 40 knots, let the nose come up, and we're flying away. Looking for a 60 knot attitude, and we'll climb away to 1,000 feet. Once the new Microsoft Flight Sim introduces helicopters, we might have a look at that and see if it's any good. I know the graphics are really good. start our crosswind turn there, levelling off at 1,000 feet, 80 knots. We'll check the compass, we want to roll out on north. It's north or close enough for government work. Actually, if it was government work, it'd probably be on south. Okay, quick check to the right before we turn downwind. Aircraft goes all over the shop. Okay, we'll start our downwind turn. Wismar, good morning. Yes, I am a real pilot. I mostly fly helicopters, corporate helicopters. Occasionally fly aeroplanes. Yesterday I was flying an Augusta 119 from Elstree to a private site near Fair Oaks Airport, which may or may not be the home of a certain Formula 1 team. Went across Heathrow a couple of times in the process. But with everything going on, my real world flying has slowed down a lot. So I'm doing some simulator world flying. What about yourself? Do you do any real world flying or just simulator flying? Okay, downwind checks, lights, RPMs, temperatures and pressures, fuel, radio call. We are 1,000 feet, 80 knots, quite good. There's the airport, a little bit further before we make our turn. The old Olympic Stadium over there. Turning on to base leg. So heading south, look right, nobody joining on final, airport's over there. We'll start reducing power, start our descent, power attitude trim. And we'll turn on to final. So we're looking for constant ground speed now, so slowing down as we get closer to the ground and aiming to keep our landing spot middle of the windscreen until we get down to about 100 feet. So that's the power all the way down, and we're barely coming down, but we are coming down steady now. That's better. We'll aim for the point where all the jets touch down, the rubber marks on the runway. Start letting a bit of power in and letting our landing point start moving down, otherwise we'll end up short. Keep everything moving forwards until we've got the aircraft nicely under control, he says. Just about. tendency to want to fly backwards, this flight model. Let's put it where we want it, and then we'll finish off with a landing of sorts. So in the real world at this point, you'd be getting ready to do your first solo. Are we down? We're down in one piece. So at this point in the real world, you'd be building towards doing your first solo. And whilst you're practicing your circuits, the instructor will go through the various emergencies in case anything goes wrong, so that he's confident, he's done his, or she, they've done their duty of care, so that you've got a fairly good chance of coping with any problems that might arise whilst you're flying around. So let's have a look at a few of those problems. One of the first issues you get going solo is the aircraft is now a lot lighter, so it will fly, well, depending on the size of your instructor and the aircraft you're in, but it will fly a bit different. Robinsons, R22s especially, when the instructor gets out, they've actually got some decent performance, and they'll sit slightly different in the hover. So the first thing you do on a solo is just lift to the hover and give yourself a few minutes just to calm down, get used to where the aircraft is sitting, try and stop the sweat from pouring off your brow, do your spot turn, and then head off into your circuit. Nothing but the City of London behind us. The other thing that would happen on a first solo is the aircraft would accelerate much quicker and climb a lot quicker because it's a lot lighter. So on this circuit, let's just talk about engine failures in the circuit. This is probably the worst point in any helicopter to get an engine failure, because you're full power, meaning you've got a lot of blade angle, a lot of drag, you're close to the ground and you don't have much speed. So yeah, if you have an engine failure at this point, you've just got to dump the lever. Don't try and turn unless you've got nothing in front of you that you can land on, because that'll just increase your rate of descent. Just fly in a straight line and just cushion your landing the best you can. Trying not to roll the aircraft, because it will come down with a bang. But the upside is you're already into wind, so that'll help a little bit if your engine should just quit. On the base leg, once we're on it, on the base leg, if you have an engine failure, you're looking for somewhere to land once you've got the thing in auto rotation on your right hand side, because the wind will be coming from your right. So you're looking for an open area on your right to put the aircraft into. But you've got a little bit of height now, a little bit of speed, so you should have enough time to find somewhere suitable. Put it left before we turn right, sorry, right before we turn left. Downwind leg with an engine failure, you're going to have to do a 180-degree turn the aircraft into wind. So the best thing to do is start with a 90-degree turn, then have a look upwind to see what's available for you to land on, and then make your last turn so that you can hit the spot that you want to land on. Downwind checks, lights, gauges, temperature, pressures, radio call. If you lose the radio in the circuit, just complete the circuit and land. The tower will know what you're doing, everybody else knows what you're doing, so don't do anything different, just finish the circuit and land. Most other malfunctions that you would get when flying the circuit you can normally get back to the airfield. So if you had gearbox chip lights, low fuel, unusual vibrations, anything like that, you could normally turn back to the airfield and land. Unless the circuit's really big, just complete the circuit. Whatever's gone wrong, unless you're on fire, I suppose, it's probably not bad enough to force you to land. You will be on the ground within a couple of minutes anyway. So if you get a gearbox chip light or something like that comes on, you should be able to finish the circuit as normal and land. The risk of trying to hurl yourself back at the ground at the airfield is that unless you've practiced it a few times, you'll usually end up making a pig's ear of it, which could then compound the error, or compound the issue that you've got. So rather than trying to make things worse, just keep calm, carry on. The only real exceptions to that are having engine failure, because then you have to come down, or something really catastrophic short of an engine failure, like massive vibration that suddenly starts. Something you feel is going to bring the aircraft out of the sky very imminently. At which point, just put it on the ground at the nearest point. But I'd probably recommend doing an engine off at that, if it's that bad, just to try and keep it simple. But otherwise, finish the circuit, land the aircraft, let them know you've got a problem as you're coming in. Just keep moving forwards as we come to a stop. Touchdown-ish. We're down. 3-point landing. Cool. Right, well, let's just do one more quick circuit round, and then we'll call this lesson done and we'll move the helicopter somewhere else. I've always wanted to fly around Rio, so I'll move the helicopter to Rio and we'll have a fly around Rio. So one more circuit, so we'll lift to the hover. Nice smooth hover, we'll do a spot turn, check behind us. Final check of our instruments, temperature and pressures to make sure there's nothing wrong with the aircraft before we go. And then off we go. Nose forward, bit of power. Pushing forward through translational lift and flat back. Looking for 40 knots. Let the nose come up, give it a bit of power. Aiming for 60 knots. Climbing on the runway heading. City of London never looked so green. Thousand feet. We'll start our crosswind turn. 1,000 feet, leveling of 80 knots. Okay, good look right, before we turn left. Turning downwind. That's Buckton Roundabout, that is. That is one of the VRPs when crossing City Airport. Okay, downwind. No warning lights are on. Temperature and pressure gauges are all green. Check fuel. Radio call. Actually, it's been quite a long time since I flew a real world circuit. You don't tend to fly them so often. If you're flying A to B stuff, you normally just fire up and go. So unless you're doing some sort of currency training, you don't normally do circuits. Probably shows why I'm so rusty doing this. Okay, let's have a look for the airport. Yeah, we're about 90 degrees off the threshold, so we'll just keep going a little bit further. Okay, good look right before we turn left. Remember to do that the other way around if you end up flying the right-hand circuit rather than the left-hand circuit. Or as I tend to do when I was instructing is point one way and then say the other way, so point right and say left. Always used to confuse my students. Okay, base leg, check right, make sure there's no one joining on final. Start our descent, power attitude trim. Once we've got a rate of descent, we'll slow down to 60 knots and turn on to final. Thames barrier. And again, as soon as we're on final, we're looking to maintain constant ground speed, constant sight picture. Might be a tiny bit low there, so we'll give it a little bit more power. Got a couple of 100 feet to go, give it a bit of power, start letting the sight picture come down the windscreen so that you don't land short. Right, keep it moving forwards as we bring the power in. Try, bring it back to a nice hover, and then we'll finish off